powerful tropical storm is sweeping across eastern China, bringing torrential rain, violent winds, widespread flooding, and major disruption to millions of people. Typhoon Dolphin has struck Zhejiang Province, unleashing dangerous weather across coastal and inland communities. Streets have turned into rivers, transportation networks have been disrupted, and authorities have been forced to evacuate hundreds of thousands of residents from areas considered vulnerable to flooding and landslides. The storm arrived after passing north of Taiwan before making landfall near Taizhou in Zhejiang Province. At its strongest, Dolphin brought sustained winds of approximately 151 kilometers per hour. But the wind was only part of the danger. The greatest threat came from the enormous amount of rainfall surrounding the storm. As Dolphin moved inland, its winds gradually weakened. However, the storm continued to carry vast amounts of tropical moisture, dumping extraordinary quantities of rain over eastern China. And in some places, the rainfall was simply overwhelming. Shanghai was among the areas experiencing the most dramatic effects. Heavy rain poured across the city, rapidly filling streets and overwhelming drainage systems. Roads that would normally carry thousands of vehicles became flooded channels of muddy water. Cars struggled to move through the rising floodwater. Pedestrians were forced to wade through inundated streets. And in some neighborhoods, residents watched helplessly as water continued to rise around buildings and vehicles. The rainfall totals were extraordinary. One weather station in central Shanghai recorded more than 300 millimeters of rain within just 24 hours. Another location recorded close to 400 millimeters. For a city as large and densely populated as Shanghai, such an enormous volume of rainfall created a major challenge for drainage systems and transportation infrastructure. The consequences quickly became visible. Roads were submerged, vehicles were stranded, public transportation was disrupted, and thousands of people found themselves unable to travel normally through the city. But Shanghai was not the only place affected. Across Zhejiang Province, authorities began taking extraordinary precautions as Typhoon Dolphin approached. In Wenzhou, more than 900,000 people were relocated from areas considered vulnerable to the storm. Residents in low-lying communities, coastal areas, and locations at risk of landslides were urged to move to safer places. Emergency shelters were prepared, rescue teams were placed on standby, and local authorities began monitoring rivers, reservoirs, roads, and other vulnerable areas. The scale of the evacuation demonstrated just how seriously officials were treating the threat. More than 1 million people across eastern China were moved to safer locations as the storm approached. For many residents, the evacuation meant leaving their homes behind and seeking shelter before the worst conditions arrived. Meanwhile, the storm was creating chaos in the transportation sector. Air travel was severely disrupted. Hundreds of flights were canceled or delayed as strong winds and torrential rain affected airports. Shanghai was particularly affected, with hundreds of flights disrupted. For travelers, what should have been an ordinary journey suddenly became a long wait inside crowded terminals, with uncertainty over when flights would resume. Outside the airports, roads were becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. Heavy rainfall reduced visibility, while floodwater accumulated across streets. Some drivers attempted to continue through flooded roads, but rapidly rising water created dangerous conditions. Authorities repeatedly warned people to avoid unnecessary travel and stay away from flooded areas. And there was another danger developing beyond the cities. Mountainous areas face the threat of landslides. After hours of relentless rainfall, soil can become saturated and unstable. Hillsides can suddenly collapse. Roads can become blocked, and communities located near steep terrain can be placed in serious danger. The threat of flooding was also increasing as rivers and streams received enormous amounts of additional water. Even after the center of the typhoon moved away, rainfall could continue for hours. This is one of the most dangerous characteristics of tropical cyclones. The storm does not have to maintain its strongest winds to remain dangerous. A weakening system can still produce devastating rainfall. And once the ground is saturated, even additional rain that might normally be manageable can trigger flash floods and landslides. Across eastern China, emergency crews remained on alert. Rescue personnel prepared equipment and vehicles. Officials monitored vulnerable communities, and residents were urged to follow evacuation orders and remain in safe locations. The storm also forced the suspension of various activities. Tourist attractions were closed, maritime operations were restricted, ferries were suspended, businesses temporarily shut down in some locations, and residents were encouraged to remain indoors as the strongest weather moved through. The impact extended across several provinces. Heavy rain associated with Dolphin affected areas including Anhui, Jiangsu, and Shandong. As the storm moved inland, its enormous cloud system continued spreading rainfall across a broad region. The danger, therefore, extended far beyond the location where Dolphin initially made landfall. For emergency authorities, this created a difficult situation. They had to prepare for multiple threats at the same time: flooding in cities, rising rivers, landslides in mountainous regions, disrupted roads, stranded vehicles, and thousands of people requiring assistance. The scenes emerging from affected communities showed how quickly extreme weather can transform everyday life. Streets became waterways, vehicles were surrounded by floodwater, people were forced to search for alternative routes. And emergency workers faced increasingly difficult conditions as they attempted to protect residents. In Shanghai, the enormous rainfall placed tremendous pressure on the city's infrastructure. A modern megacity with millions of residents was suddenly dealing with an extraordinary volume of water. Drainage systems worked continuously, but in some areas the rainfall arrived faster than the water could be removed. And when that happens, even major urban roads can quickly become flooded. For residents living in the vulnerable neighborhoods, the situation became even more frightening. The water could continue rising, electricity and transportation services could be disrupted, and roads normally used as escape routes could become impassable. Authorities therefore continued urging people to remain cautious and avoid taking unnecessary risks. One of the biggest dangers during flash floods is deceptively simple. Floodwater can appear shallow while hiding dangerous currents, open drains, damaged roads, or submerged obstacles. A vehicle can lose traction, a person can be swept away, and a seemingly manageable road can suddenly become extremely dangerous. That is why residents were urged not to attempt to cross fast-moving floodwater. As Typhoon Dolphin weakened further inland, attention began shifting from preparation to recovery. But recovery would not be immediate. Floodwater would need to drain, roads would need to be cleared, transportation services would need to resume, and officials would have to inspect infrastructure for damage. Communities affected by landslides would also need to be assessed before roads and buildings could safely reopen. For millions of people, the storm was a dramatic reminder of the destructive power of extreme weather. Typhoon Dolphin demonstrated that the greatest threat from a tropical cyclone does not always come from its strongest winds. Sometimes the most destructive force is water. Hour after hour, rainfall can accumulate. Rivers can rise. Drainage systems can become overwhelmed, and entire neighborhoods can be transformed in a matter of hours. As eastern China begins the difficult process of recovering from Typhoon Dolphin, authorities remain focused on protecting residents and preventing additional casualties. The storm may be weakening, but the emergency is far from over. Floodwaters can remain dangerous long after the rain stops. Landslides can occur after the storm has already passed, and rivers can continue rising as water flows downstream from saturated areas. For communities across Zhejiang, Shanghai, and neighboring provinces, the next phase will be about survival, rescue, and recovery. Emergency crews will continue searching vulnerable areas. Authorities will monitor rivers and reservoirs. Residents will begin assessing damage to their homes and businesses, and transportation networks will slowly attempt to return to normal. Typhoon Dolphin has left behind a powerful warning. Nature can overwhelm even the most advanced cities when extreme rainfall arrives on a massive scale. And when millions of people live within a densely connected region, the effects of a single storm can spread rapidly across transportation, business, communications, and everyday life. For now, eastern China remains on alert. The rain may eventually stop, the winds may continue to weaken, but the water remains. And for the people living in the storm's path, the long road toward recovery has only just begun.